All right. Looks like we're live. So, hello, and welcome to the conclusion section of a long week we had about this is probably 50th session that we did, and that goes through the entire gamut of whatever you want to talk about cyber talent. Coming from or starting from where from the entrepreneurship all the way to the policy making. So with me, we have Paul Tortoro from the Office of National Cybersecurity Directorate and Chris Painter from Global Forum for Cyber Expertise. And I think the two, of course, key elements of the cybersecurity talent overall. And what we're going to wrap up, this session and overall the week with is kind of a little bit of learning recap, a little of experiential recap, and a call to action that we can take forward with us today. So, Chris, sir, I would like to start with you, give a little of introduction.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm Chris Painter. I said I'm the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which is a multi-stakeholder global capacity building group. And it's organized around different issues, but one of the issues on cyber security, one of the issues is skills and workforce development and awareness, which, that's one of the working groups, which is the subject we're talking about today. And the first thing I'd say, even before I get to that, and before that, I was in the federal government a long time in different roles. And, like others had talked about in the last panel, kind of fell from one job to the other and always loved what I was doing. And never had a 5-year or even a 10-minute plan most of the time. And so I would foot stomp what folks said in the last panel, that the most important thing as you're looking at this is to have a passion for the subject and just be open to opportunities. Maybe the opportunity you get is not the one you wanted right then, but I will tell you those opportunities open up, and there are far more of them now than there were before. So, when we're talking about this issue of, we can talk more about this, obviously. I don't know how you want this cadence to go,
Yeah.
but obviously one of the important things is just how we can get more folks in the cyber talent pipeline. And this is an endemic issue here and around the world, that there are just not enough people available for all the jobs, and that's a good thing that are out there. It's a good thing for people looking for the jobs. It's not a good thing for the people who need the folks. But how can we really build that? And that involves, to me, not just focusing on universities and colleges, but looking at the full spectrum, including everything from grade school all the way through, companies and even federal government, where you have career paths for this rather than just catch as catch can. But I'm happy to go into a lot more detail, certainly. But
sure thing, let's do.
To make it more conversational.
Absolutely. Paul, sir, we got you introduced yesterday. Thanks for kicking us off and then closing us out today. For those that are joining us online today, just a quick introduction of your role. And it's week 2, so.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. So I'm in the second week of being assigned to working with Chris Inglis on the National Cyber Director staff. And he's asked me to come on board to specifically look at workforce from his perspective and the lanes and the roads that he has, and what can we do from the National Cyber Director staff to hopefully answer some of the challenges that have been discussed this week. And so it is the second week in the job. My other job is at the Naval Academy, where I'm the director of the Center for Cybersecurity Studies, and we hosted Mr. Painter there one night for a talk to our midshipmen about the future that they have as well. So this is a great topic. I'm happy to join you, sir.
Happy to be here. Happy to join you too.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you could convene here.
Yeah.
So no, thank you for the introduction. I think it's basically using Chris, your journey and your experience as a guide, and also putting it together in a structure that we use. We had this discussion this afternoon also about Rodney Patterson talked about the nice structure, which could probably tie it all together. So tell me a little bit about GFCE and the global forum, basically making sure not only you have a cybersecurity expertise, but also scale, right, that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we saw, and back when I was in the State Department, in the White House, and the Justice Department, all these other jobs I was at, one of the priorities for us was trying to do capacity building around the world. It's foundational. The way I look at capacity building is it's the foundation for both all the good things you're trying to achieve in cyberspace, and not just cybersecurity, but also, this move to digitalization and digital economies. I think you've heard throughout some of the presentations here, there's still this problem where the folks who are in the innovation and digital economy bucket are not the ones who are talking to the security people, but they're each integral to one another. You need to have security to succeed in that digitization. But we saw all these capacity building things happening, and frankly, not really well resourced, not really well organized. I used to joke the same 3 people and name a country got trained by like 12 different countries. And I even had an experience in the Pacific Islands where someone said, enough with building a CERT 101. We've got that from 10 different people. Tell us something else, And so if the resources are not that strong, how can we organize this better? How can we bring together not just governments, because the GFC has about 60 governments and intergovernmental organizations, but private sector, there are a couple dozen of those, and civil society and academia groups, to really elevate this, to make sure that people understand why this is important and foundational. And then can we get resources out there? So I mentioned there are 5 working groups. One's on strategies and policies for countries, which include, all good strategies should have the workforce component as part of them. One is on like norms and diplomacy issues. One is on cybercrime. One is on incident response and certs. One's on standards, and one that's really critical is on this area of skills development. And we've both organized around that, but also there's a portal called the Sybil portal, and these are all findable at dgfc.org, which talks about the organization, how it's set up, and how it's grown over the years. But the idea is the Sybil portal is a portal, as you might imagine, that has all these best practices and all these different areas linked to it. We just did a study recently on education, on building education and workforce in a small W for K through 12 and even high school, and how you do that, and try to come up with some things that we need to think about, that folks need to think about there. But it really is an underlying thing. If you don't have the workforce to do it, countries can't do this in a way that makes sense. One other thing I just want to mention, which we've seen, I've seen it both in the GFC, but seen it more generally too, is that it goes back to this kind of weird dichotomy between the kind of innovation, digital innovation agenda and the cybersecurity one, is that one problem, I think, and even in workforce, has been really prioritizing this, getting countries to say this is a priority issue. Yeah. So getting not just countries, but universities and businesses and others, they've done that with the sort of, we've just heard from our former speakers, people who go into the area of digital products or digital services or ICT, but not as much with security until recently. And I think that's where we have to put more emphasis to get more people into this, because as was said before, this is not just a fun area. This is a challenging area, and there's room for everyone. And it's not, you don't have to be a coder or a technical engineer in any way. We also need the translators between those people and the policy people. We need people who can do policy. We need people really across the board. I'm a recovering lawyer, which you never recover from entirely, but you need all these different skills. And that makes the discipline stronger too. And it's actually fun. It's not just fun technically. This is one of the few areas, I used to tell people at State, young people at State, that look, this is a great area to be in because you get to shape the environment in a way you just don't in a lot of other areas. A lot of other areas are cooked. You sort of know what the policy is. This area is truly evolving, and you could have a larger impact. And that's partly what the GFC tries to do through a lot of its activities.
Absolutely, and then it's continuing to evolve. It will probably, it's shifting to say the least, right? So no, thank you for that. So Paul, coming to the role that ONCD is kind of poised to play, and your particular role, what are you looking for in the industry for considering in the overall national cybersecurity strategy, which I believe, if you ask Rodney, he has a structured framework already. You have Cisa in the morning, and they are putting resources out. How are you looking to put it all together?
So a couple ideas, and there is plenty of work that's been done before. I think every agency, and Chris knows this, have been working on workforce cyber strategy and cyber overall cyber strategies, and there's plenty of work that's been done. So as Director Inglis says, we're not coming here to create just another level. It's what can we do? So he's got 4 guiding principles, basically champion federal coherence. So there's a lot going on. How do we provide some cohesion then on all these different efforts instead of creating another level? That's not what we're going to do. improve public-private cooperation and partnership in this, and so that involves a lot. And then align resources to aspirations. I think if you've heard me talk yesterday, I've counted at least 28 official federally funded efforts in the cyber field, both through K through 12 up through graduate and grants. So that's a lot of different programs. And so how do we make sure that they're being spent the right way? Which, credit those that are doing great things. Maybe we need more of these things. And the last one is what he calls increasing present and future resilience, which actually does include the workforce, which then ties into a theme that we actually started at the Naval Academy. We graduate 1,000 officers every year, and 950 of them are going to go be pilots and Marines and ship drivers. But 40 or so are going to go to information warfare, cyber. So it's just a small amount. So we took an approach where everyone should have some awareness of cyber with everyone that's going to be there. Many of them that are going to be in fields that require a little bit better understanding of the digital environment of procurement, contracting, systems they're putting on ships. And then the few are those that are going to be actually doing the cyber. So that's actually one reason why Director Ingles called me over was, hey, can we do this? Can we scale that to the United States? Can we do an all, many, few? And there aren't boundaries between each of those layers. But if you think about your organization, there's probably people you can imagine, yeah, that's probably in the all category. Everyone in America raise their digital awareness a little bit. Many of them that I mentioned earlier, procurement, contractors, legal, policy folks, you name it, that might have some tie, need to have a better understanding of what they're actually doing or what they're buying. And so maybe they need a little bit better focus on cyber education, a little bit more than just the average user. And then those few that we're really here to talk about, the numbers of vacancies in the United States ranges between 500 and 600,000 cyber vacancies across the nation, public and private. And I think if you went globally, it's in the millions.
Yep.
I've seen 15 or 16 million. So doesn't sound like the few, but that's really the few. How do we target those that need the skills, right? And then how do we then remove the barriers that prevent people from getting into those, whether you're a recovering lawyer or a recovering Navy submariner, you need to have the ability to move laterally or vertically. And what are the barriers that preclude those that are across America that can't get into it, whether it's they don't have the ability to get on the internet, they just don't have the school that provides it, or those that are just stuck in a career that they don't like and just don't know how to get from one place to another. So Chris, Director Ingles, has tasked me with seeing if we can develop a national strategy that ties together many of these things that Rodney has already worked on and others, that doesn't create, once again, another layer, but then ties things together and then facilitates the removal of those barriers, whether they're cultural, societal, technical, you name it, as well as provide roadmaps for those that want to get into cyber, whether it's the few or maybe it's the many, but provide those resources that we can do from the federal side, and then to encourage this, how can the public and private work together on the same path? And as Chris mentioned, this is one area where no one's actually going to argue with you that we need to solve this. And so I'm sure at the State Department didn't have many of those where no one was arguing, but this is one where everyone's like, yes, why? Let's have more of this. So my job is not to actually have more of this, it's to provide a little bit more federal cohesion from what we can do. And then how do we encourage all those people that want to get in this field to get into it, as well as maybe there are better ways to do things, working closely with the agencies that already have cyber programs, DoD, DHS, Cisa, and others. So we're not here to create another level. We're here to actually try to make things work smoother and try to take big steps to fill that 500,000 skilled labor shortage while bringing everyone else, including my father, who forwards me emails all the time. What do you think about this? But raise everyone's awareness from K through 12, you name it, from everyone, that we have a little bit better understanding of the digital environment so we can take the full advantage of it. And then those that want to get in this field, maybe we find easier ways for them to get in. Challenges for me that in the federal side is maybe there are barriers, or sometimes there are barriers. You need the right degree, the right amount of experience already to get into a job. Maybe we find a different way to create cyber apprenticeships or other ways that maybe we don't remove barriers, but we ease some of the barriers so that people can get into it. Because as many of you know, if you don't have the experience but you have a degree, well, you're in this terrible loop where you can't get in. So if I can do anything in my short time with working for Director Ingles, is maybe I can help remove or ease some of those barriers to allow more people to get in and then figure out ways that they can actually move into other entities, maybe move into the public sector, then back to the private sector and back and forth with obviously incentives and bonuses to keep them there.
It's interesting if you look at, I mean, as you said, a lot of good work has been done in the past. And one of the most depressing things you can do, not that I'm suggesting you do depressing things, is to read past cyber strategies for the U.S. or any country. But we, workforce development has talked about, when we did the cyber strategy in 2009, the cyber policy review we talked about there, launched the NICE initiative, which I didn't name, but it's an interesting name for it. In 2003, the cyber strategy of the U.S. talks about workforce development. I mean, it's always striking. You read these strategies and how many things haven't been done yet. But I think we're in a different place now. I think we have the opportunity to make real progress. And as you said, you're not trying to add another layer. You're trying to actually do implementation. You're trying to figure out how to do this. And there's also been, I think, a cultural change around this issue. For us, I've been doing cyber now for 30 years. But for us, we've been doing this for a while. We were always kind of yelling in the darkness, trying to get people to pay attention. This is an important issue. Listen to us. And some did, but a lot didn't, especially at senior policy levels or senior levels of companies and others. And that's changing because the threats are changing. And things like colonial pipelines and ransomware brought it home to ordinary individuals in a way that massive espionage just won't. And so I think we have an opportunity now. You always say, don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Yes.
We have an opportunity to really make progress because now it's no kidding more of a national security, economic security issue, diplomatic issue. But that all requires that workforce challenge. And I think there's more of a sense that, certainly in the White House and throughout the federal government, you don't have the people we have in those places now, even at the higher cabinet levels, are people who've dealt with these issues before, so you don't have to spoon feed them this issue.
That's true.
And that's a great opportunity too. So I do think we can make progress on this. We can build on what we've done in the past, build on what we're seeing internationally too, and it could be a model not just for the United States, but more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And cyber specifically being a globally, global thing. I mean, there's no boundary here, and we are affected as much as by anything happening in any part of the world as it's happening domestically. So one thing I would like to kind of maybe bring out in terms of OECD is we talked about this in terms of Cisa as well. Being a new organization gives you a little bit more kind of novelty power, as also ability to do things a little bit naturally better than what the preceding agencies or organizations have. What do you think OECD stands in terms of having the flexibility to do what you want to do, right?
So it's true that there's never been a national cyber director before. There have been people in power, in positions within the White House organization, but there clearly is now a national cyber director that has the ability to seek better ways to have federal cohesion. Director Inglis, if you haven't seen it, I think he was in the Foreign Affairs not too long ago, an article on a new cyber social contract, where he sees that that in the cyber domain, it's broadly three areas. It's people, doctrine, and processes, and technology. And so we keep looking to fix the technology and forcing the technology to bend to the people. But there's a doctrine problem. The process is like, who's in charge? Who should be responsible for this? And he uses the solar winds or the colonial pipeline where security was passed on down the line. Who should be held responsible? So some of it actually begins with how do you create that responsibility that then fixes the problem. So we can try fixing technology all we want, but there's other things one thing he's looking at is how can we doctrinally change who's responsible for security. It shouldn't be my dad clicking on a link who says, hey, if I can pick up a book, physical book, I'm not going to have my bank account drained. But if I try to go online to read a book, I might have my bank account drained. He's right, because security has been passed down. So one thing the director is looking at is there something he can do that actually provide some of that accountability that you might see in other sectors, whether it's aviation or transportation. You can see that there is direction of who's in charge. I should be able to point to somebody. Yeah. Where Solar Winds, actually, I think they thought that security would be handed off down the line. If your customer's duty, why isn't duty taking care of that? One of them is actually changing that by changing the doctrine a little bit, or forcing responsibilities. Then you have maybe software designers actually think about security when they're putting, or app developers are thinking about security, or the contractors are thinking about security, or those at Colonial Pipeline don't disconnect the operational side of the network because they don't understand that the ransomware actually didn't get to there, and all of a sudden we're all lining up for gas when there's no gas shortage. So how do you create that better doctrine that has accountability, responsibility, and then the people will shape themselves to that, and then you can bring the technology together. So there's a lot of that going on. Maybe we can't fix the technology, but there's things that we can do with the doctrine and the people is the skills that we're looking at hiring. So that's one thing we're trying to do.
And government has as the last panel was saying too, there's been this dirty word of regulation for years, but the fact is the government does have to play a bigger role, I think. And some of the recent instances have illustrated this. There's now a national reporting law, which I will tell you, I started working on that 20 years ago, and it's amazing it's taken this long, but great. They're talking about minimum standards for some critical infrastructure. Europe is already doing that. Others are doing that. As a recovering lawyer, I never practiced in this part, but liability drives things like insurance and other things. There is no liability. There's no standard of care here. So, I think we're moving in the direction, even with voluntary frameworks, where people are getting there. But it still comes down to making people take it seriously, and
Sure.
they do. And that also spills over to workforce, because as you say, you don't need everyone to be the brain surgeon. You need people. Everyone should be triaged to understand what the issue is. Then you have different levels there. But one of the problems has been that, and one of our prior panelists said this, that when she said she wanted to go in this, people said that was a mistake. I don't think that's true anymore. Sometimes it's true, but that means you have to create a career path within these different entities. I mean, in the government, that's been a problem, and law enforcement and others, and they have done that. At companies, you have to see you're actually going to succeed. It's not a dead end for you. And that's tied then to the awareness of why this is critical to the company, the sector, the civil society group, or the government entity, which I think we're getting to, but we're not there yet.
But do you see the journey that it took to get to now establishing an ONCD? Some of the critical pieces that are already included, and Paul mentioned about the doctrine piece, the process piece, and the technology piece. Do you think that that is enough, or there are certain other aspects you're looking at?
No, I mean,
other agencies pulling together
from a key strategic framework issue. That's right, and you have to then push that out so it's not just national but international, because all of our, not just our supply chains, but our actual workforce pipelines are transcend national boundaries, especially in this day and age. So you have to, I think, then look for both best practices in other places in the world, and then try to export your best practices too. So I think that's another dimension of that framework you mentioned. But a lot of it then comes down to, getting buy-in and implementation by folks. And to be sure, there are some sectors who get this, the financial service sector largely, now the power grid sector more, but there are a lot that don't. I mean, this is not, like I said, we talked about, cyber awareness is a whole other issue, but we talked about that for a number of years, and it's still not there yet. So education and awareness kind of go together, and so does the skill development, because if there's no awareness, people don't want to go into the field or don't value those professions. So that's a harder nut to crack, but I think that also is, for good or bad, it's changing. I mean, I think people are now, bad in the sense that the things that are making it change are bad, but the attitudes, I think, are changing somewhat.
Yeah, true. And Paul, how about, in terms of, we see Cisa has a great public outreach, and they're kind of the consultants for the federal government and all. And you remind us of Director English talking about him and the organization as a coach, right? So where do you see coaches' point in the communication of what all you're doing that could?
Yeah, so definitely Cisa has actually filled a void, and they've done wonderful things in the last 3 or 4 years of actually providing, if you're actually looking for a cyber job, they've got a nice ability on some of their web pages to show you some of the ways and paths. So they're doing great things. So yes, Chris mentioned there are very capable people at the top now. You have Jen Easterly at Cisa, and you've got Ann Newberger on the National Security Council staff, and you have Chris Ingles, all coming from NSA. So these are 3 of the best the nation has. So they're working together. So Chris sort of sees himself as a coach or a coordinator, and then Ann and Jen have their respective roles. And so they're actually doing the operational stuff, but they work together very closely on lots of the issues, the Russia, Ukraine, getting information out, actionable intelligence, which means intelligence that someone can then use, where in the past, sometimes it would just be intelligence now we're actually providing, as you can see, not just cyber, but all sorts of intelligence that people can then use. And so since our private sector runs most of our critical infrastructure, if we can give them actionable intelligence on Russian activities of what they're doing trying to do it against us or Ukraine, actually can get them ahead. And what's interesting is that some of the industry then said, well, give us more. And it was like, that way, that's all we had. You guys will see, actually, you might see it before we do because of the endpoints. You know, if you're 80% of our critical infrastructure is held by private industry, then they have the endpoints and the targets. And so sometimes we'll get tipped by industry. But it's interesting that it was happening before Russia, Ukraine, but it's actually emphasized the need to have that sharing of information so that if we get some type of tipper that says that Russia is doing X, Y, or Z, let's get that to the critical infrastructure nodes. But then again, if the banking system is seeing a strange amount of information attacks coming from a certain vector, or are we using some sort of 0-day, well, we can then share that information. So that's been happening through just the last couple of years, I think, and Cisa helped do that as well as, and so the NCD's role is to help coordinate that sharing of information, encouraging others to share information. As Chris probably saw more than I have, is there was a historical reticence to actually share information for risk of announcing you're in trouble. But now it seems like there's a lot more, and I credit the CISA and now the NCD's role is to help create more of that and see there is a benefit to everyone to share this information for everyone.
And the other thing it does is it demonstrates success. So on the one hand, the government didn't want to share information, especially sensitive information, because of exposing sources and methods. And then companies didn't want to share information because they were afraid of being further victimized by that. But the fact is that, you know, especially in the last few months where you see this aggressive sharing of information that kind of outs, not even the cyber field, outs what Putin's going to do in the Ukraine, that shows it works. So the worst thing you can do in this area is engender a feeling of helplessness. So too often in the past, we've talked about cyber 9/11s and cyber Pearl Harbors, which I hate those phrases.
Me too.
Because we haven't seen them, and I don't think we're going to see them. But we're going to see bad things, significantly bad things. But the problem with those analogies is then you're like, oh my God, what can we do about that? And the ordinary person is what we do about it. Why should I even think about going to this field when it's just it's just a scary mansion, when I can do something else. But now we're seeing demonstrated success, and people are quite right that you don't always see the successes. Success is when nothing bad happens, but there are examples of success you can promote and say this is what you could be part of, and I think that's really helpful too.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important, right? We are expecting this momentous occasions or impacts, when then getting this death by 1,000 paper cuts that's happening all the day, every day, especially in the mid-market, right, which cannot afford cybersecurity in general, which critical infrastructure is huge, right? 80% or 90% of them are munis and small utility providers, which barely have IT staff or get upon cyber staff. So that brings us to a little bit of twist in the discussion around, say, for example, supply chain, and I think there is a security bill of materials which became a really emphasis recently because of all the cybersecurity issues that we realized, SolarWinds included. Where do you see ONCD's role in extending that beyond the government coordination to the private sector?
Yeah, so there actually is. Director Inglis has another office he's standing up that is also going to do coordination on the supply chain for all and find out how you can direct a little bit more responsibility, some better compliance perhaps. DoD's launched a couple years ago the CMMC model, which actually looks at if you're going to have a contract support to DoD, it must follow a number of requirements. It usually involves only U.S. suppliers of some kind, but there's there's another coordination role for the NCD that's going to be working more on the technical side, but that can they get ahead of SolarWinds when you see that SolarWinds had, an office in Belarus or in other places where now you think, well, how did that happen? But there was also a lot going in the DoD's on my side. I recall there was a submarine that was important at the pier, and the submarines are nuclear reactors, but they've got a diesel generator in case there's an emergency, and they turn on their diesel generator. It was at the pier, it was plugged in the internet, and the diesel generator sent a request through the internet back to patch. It was an automatic patch it was seeking from its contract site, but no one was aware that the diesel generator would need an update for its system and was going to automatically send a request out. So interesting things like that. That's a big example, but the NCD has another office that is looking at the supply chain, open source supply, things like that, how do we coordinate better amongst the entire federal government? I'm not sure what we can do on the private sector side, other than if you're contracting with the government, it would be tough to direct, perhaps maybe with the critical infrastructure, some requirements, but so that's not my lane in the road per se, but I do know Director Inglis is standing up an office to help coordinate some of that as well.
That's a good news, because I think when you're coordinating, it's the coordination not only within, but also outside, which I believe will be very, very, very helpful for both private sector and public sector, right?
And look, I like some of the things the administration has done. I like a lot of things the administration has done, but one of them is the executive order that creates the software bill of materials that NIST is working out. And that helps raise cybersecurity more generally, because you're saying the government, who's a huge purchaser, is going to demand this. And it's the same with government contracts. But supply chain is a real big issue. And in a way, that also creates opportunities for folks who are looking for careers in this area, because it's not just limited to the traditional things we're thinking about supply chain. It's everything from us, leading the world and actually creating things too, because we should never have been in a position where you had to choose between 2 providers for 5G services. That was crazy. And that was because this idea of, industrial policy was a bad word in the U.S. We would never, there's the various shades of that. One is investing in research and development, which creates jobs and creates careers. And we need to do that more. And that's something the federal government can step up on to make sure that we're ahead of the curve. And it's also working with allies and partners on that. So I think that the greater focus on that issue also helps create more career paths for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at all the resources that we are starting to get to tap into with the last 10, 15 years of cybersecurity leadership that has gone in to create this. I mean, we have in the room representatives from DOL supporting the apprenticeship program. We have folks in the software bill of materials that Alan and team put together initially, and from Department of Commerce side come over to Cisa. I think this all are kind of resources available to us. I'm looking for it, as we go forward. I'm looking for more pathways for students and entry-level people to get into it. I think one open area will probably remain is that yesterday we talked about getting security clearances, right? In the last session that we had, not this event, but the previous one roundtable we had, and Rex was part of that, was like, how can we get CISOs an ability to get a security clearance, because then they can technically get to access to devices. So I think some of the open questions remain, some of those answered, and through your work.
Yeah, I mean, those are hard to answer, although I'd say, and this has been a problem for a long time. And then even if you get that CISO security clearance, they still have to talk to their staff. So, I mean, there's been this argument, well, the government can share more information without telling you the context, but I will tell you that people who are out there trying to do their jobs get overwhelmed with information. And so if you can't prioritize and contextualize, that's a big problem. And I think one thing the government's done a lot recently is try to contextualize, say this is where the threat's coming from, and do more declassification, or at least tear line stuff that they can do. But I think we've also seen in the Ukraine conflict, again, quick declassification of stuff that's actionable. So you can do it. So we have to change. We talked about vulnerability disclosures. Years ago, people just hold them. Now the default is to disclose it. There's a process for that. Same thing, I think, more generally with some of these threats and other things. We just need to be more, the government needs to be on the front foot. And the private sector also, I hate this term. Someone said this before. I hate public-private partnership. It's said so often. It's like a
cliche.
It's just like a mantra that people, without it meaning something. What it means really is that there's something positive that can be shared on both sides. And I think we're working toward that. I think that's kind of where the gold standard is in this. But more generally, I think if we're talking about talent and skills, there have never been as many opportunities as there are now, I think. And there still aren't defined career paths for a lot of folks. When they're coming in, people call me and say, well, how do I do what you did? And I was like, I don't know. But there are some other ways you can do it. And there's no real way, there's opportunities to get into these things in the government, in the private sector, or even completely outside of it in academia and other areas. So I think we need to encourage that more. And I hope these efforts that you're leading over for Chris are a big part of that.
Good deal. All right. Now we got a couple, maybe the last minute to maybe get your last kind of final thoughts.
So one thing, if those in the group haven't seen it, think the actual title is the National Academy of Public Administration, NAPA, did a study for Cisa, call to action on workforce. It's a great report. It does talk about implementation of better things to get more workforce, how do we remove barriers, and I'm sort of using that as a blueprint if we're going to develop a strategy that's got some teeth to it. They've got some very good ideas in there. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend taking a look at it because it may help you in your sector or your business, because it talks about key things that you might want to do to how do you get more people in the workforce, how do you remove barriers, et cetera. So it's worth a scan. There's a shorter document if you just want to read through the small. But I'm using it sort of as a roadmap along with things like the NIST framework. If we want a strategy that's got teeth, that's going to be helpful, not just another strategy 10 years from now. Someone saying, yeah, we've had a strategy, but something that can have an implementation. So anyway, take a look at that report. It does talk a lot about how do you develop a better workforce, both at the nation level, and then actually the product was made for Cisa, so there's a lot of Cisa discussion in there as well.
Good deal. Yeah, and then I just probably throw in that those who are not familiar with NEPA, Dr. Diana Burley, who's on our board, she's very much connected to it. She's one of the authors. So, please feel free to reach out to her, and for a shorter version, probably she can give you and get some resources towards that.
The executive.
Yeah, and I'd say, I mentioned the Civil portal before, which is the civilportal.org. So go to that, go to GFC. There's lots of materials there on these issues generally. But also, I think it's worth looking at what other countries have done too. And in terms of this, doing some of this development we talked about, Israel has been very successful. Estonia has been successful. And there's smaller countries, and it's easier for them than for us. The Netherlands has been doing this. So I think we can all learn from. No one has all the answers in this, so we can all learn from each other and how this is going about. Because I think this is not a unique U.S. problem by any means. Every country in the world is facing the same problem, and every business, and certainly every government.
Absolutely. No, I think this is a global problem. It's recognized now. It's on the headlines. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And those that joined us online and stayed with us for the entire week and then given us a lot of feedback online, offline, engaged with us. Please take a listen to that entirety. We'll try to put this up in a full report that's available to everyone, shared with everyone. We'll try to do a better job in the executive summary. We'll probably do the letter to the board that our friend Tom Patterson says that it should be 1 page, 10 things that we can work on. But there is an incredible amount of information and inputs we collected over the 50 sessions that we did over the last 5 days, and hopefully this will be kind of that the source of information that you could view and put to use in your daily life as executives who are trying to hire people, expand your programs, switching jobs, and trying to learn something new. And those that are trying to get into the career in cyber, this is going to be extremely important. As I cannot emphasize the amount of passion the leaders in this space have, the commitment that they have, the motivation, that their self-motivation and self-drive they have to bring all their knowledge and experience to this. They have taken their time out of their busy schedule to come out and put together these sessions over the last 5 days, and those that came in person in the last 2 days to join us, to record these conversations, to share those with that are here in person. I think it's been extremely helpful, extremely useful, and hopefully this will remain to be a great resource to the rest of the community. So thank you all. Thanks for joining us through the week, and we look forward to do this in a more full house the next year with students, actually the career seekers in place with us. So thank you again, and we sign off with the entire Cyber Talent Week.